Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Guten Abend. Okay, if we can all take our seats, we'll get started. Okay, welcome to the last session of the day. Our speakers are all that stand between you and cocktail hour, but they're going to make it worth your while. So do stay awake and stay involved. A couple of housekeeping notes before we kick off. There are some forms in front of you placed on the seats, evaluation forms, feedback forms. This is for you to tell us what you think of the conference, what sessions are valuable, what you'd like to see more of, what you'd like to see less of. We do really take these very seriously into consideration as we build our global conference programs. So do take the time to fill them in sometime between now and the end of the day tomorrow. There will be a prize draw at the end of the conference, so worth sticking around for and worth certainly filling in. So thank you for that. Immediately following this session, we will have coaches leaving for the gala dinner at the Steinberger Hotel, which is not far away. Beautiful location, so we look forward to seeing you there. And this is another live streaming session, and the last 10 minutes or so, we're going to do some live voting, actually. So you're going to have some questions that you can answer in real time using the system. So please log in either now or then to participate in that. And our global audience will also obviously have the chance to vote on that too. So it's a good opportunity to get a feel for some of the trends and directions that we think the sector is going. Okay. This session is called Adding Value to the Complete Supply Chain, sort of building off of the overall conference theme of exploration of value. What do we mean by that complete supply chain? It's something that I think a lot of companies talk about, but I'm not 100% certain that it's what they're doing. I think there's lots of difficulties and challenges to taking a truly complete supply chain view, whether it's tenders or RFQs that only look at sections or pieces that chop up the supply chain. Or whether it's silos within a car maker that get pushed more by purchasing or by manufacturing or what have you. But certainly it's 3 years to the day since Fukushima nearly, and since then we've certainly heard a lot more about visibility in the supply chain, understanding risk, and really understanding the full view. So there's the kind of logistics and freight risks, but going deeper than that, we're also talking more with car makers about how they engineer their supply chain, how they do engineer breakpoints and packaging in the vehicle development stage, or sometimes even before a vehicle is officially even signed off for development. Just actually recently completed an interview with Michael Scholl, Director of Supply Chain at Opel. He'll be a main story for us in the upcoming issue, and we're lucky to actually have his colleague, of course, here in Marzell, talking a lot about front loading and the how Opel and GM in general has integrated and improved some of those processes. But we also, so on our panel today, we're bringing together the car maker to give us their view on how they're doing this, but we also have some logistics service providers with WWL and Neovia to give us their perspective and to understand both where we can improve and where there are deficiencies and faults in having this total view. We should also have plenty of time for Q&A because we're going to have some short presentations and announcements and discussions from the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to you. So without wasting any more time, I'd like to invite Marzell Bandur, Director of Supply Chain Planning at Opel Vauxhall.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon from my side as well. I would like to spend about the next 10 minutes to talk a little bit about supply chain and future supply chain. A little bit about my background. I'm in charge of supply chain planning. A lot of people asking what is supply chain planning. 2 sentences about that one. My role is to serve my operational colleagues with new capabilities from an end-to-end perspective, as well as to plan the future value chain for future programs coming up. And this includes as well containerization for Opel Vauxhall. I'm used to show the slides. On the lower right corner, I would like to show what we understand the scope of supply chain. It means for us the end-to-end responsibility from vehicle orders the dealers are submitting in our systems until the finished vehicle delivery back to the dealer. as well as coordinating and steering the complete material flow from our first-tier suppliers into our plants. This includes, of course, our powertrain plants as internal first-tier suppliers. We don't call them internal first-tier suppliers, but from a pure value chain perspective, you could say they are. You see, I'm showing the slide. We call it internally the bubble slide. There are four organizational monuments displayed. It's engineering, manufacturing, purchasing, and sales, coming out of a history. These are the big players in a company. On top, you can say finance is also a big player. And whatever they do, we from a supply chain, it goes through our hand. It goes also through your hands, sitting in this audience, because every part engineering is developing, we need to handle. We have breakpoint setting, we have run-out scenarios, we have launch scenarios in there, and every vehicle order coming from our dealers are running through our systems and hands as well. We are planning it in between, and from a physical material flow, all the materials we are getting from our suppliers, purchasing and sourcing for us, and delivering to our manufacturing facilities where they are used and built into complete cars. So supply chain is in the middle. We are not the center of the company. We are more the buffer between these four organizations. And maybe the grease to make the material flow, the value stream, working. And I just want to use an analogy from about coming back from 15, 20 years when we had how we were building cars. I mean, we were building cars on an assembly line. There was maybe one model, if at all, 2 body styles, 5 different colors, a handful of options, a manufacturing vertical integration. I mean, we did seats. Yeah? We had sewing operations in our plants. And in essence, it was delivered raw components, yeah? Raw material to build the cars. Looking how we do it today, we have reduced our vertical integration. We have a lot of our parts are developed and delivered from our suppliers, big parts. We have moved to low-cost countries. The world has changed. We are going to China. We are going to the Eastern European countries, low-cost countries. So we are transporting, in the meantime, in essence, we are transporting more parts, bigger parts, over longer distances. And with all the regulations we have on CO2 regulation and road tolls, at higher prices than we did it at earlier times. So you could say 20 years ago, the supply chain costs were somewhat neglectable in the grand scheme of the things, but in the last years, they are no longer, and it's time to change the role from a supply chain perspective. In this kind of pyramid, I want to show, how we are visible in the organization. What we do a little bit in the background, we are doing day-to-day operations in terms of follow-up activities and planning the transportation. And we may do the operation planning in terms of supply and demand and capacity. A big breakthrough and a lot of visibility we get when there's a crisis mode. Then the KPIs of an organization are impacted. And one of the major KPI is lost vehicle. We are not able, as an organization, to produce cars. And you see these events, you heard this today a couple of times, tsunami in Japan, the ash cloud, Thailand flood, and so on. In these cases, supply chain then keeps all the strings together and saying what can be built, what cannot be built. But from a value perspective, in terms of money we spend, at this point of time, all the decisions are made. We are just reacting to it. If we want to add value from a supply chain perspective, we need to go into the planning activities. And when I see, there's a sales planning department, there's a product engineering department, there's a manufacturing engineering department, where they're all planning the future. We think it's absolutely necessary to have a supply chain engineering department planning the future for the supply chain. Not in terms of just planning the network on a tactical or strategic perspective, but also into the advanced planning in how will future products looking like, how are they being developed, and how will a supplier footprint look like to manage the complete value chain cost efficiently. How to trade off different cost perspectives. And I want to illustrate this on the slide on the left side. There are 2 ways doing cost reduction. On the left side, you see, I would call it continuous improvement. You could, and use an example, you can just pack more material onto a truck to have a better truck utilization, and this usually does not have any impact. You can put more workload into an operator station that he has, let's say, he gets used 95% or instead versus 98, something like that. This is continuous improvement. You can, every silo, every function can do it by themselves because there's no impact. The big opportunities, what we see is when we start to trade off the various cost functions. And now I put it in, we have investment in terms of, let's say, vendor tooling. We have the material price, freight cost, and manufacturing. And let's use an example. We go, for example, for double tooling, reducing the distances. In this case, the material value might go up. The investment for double tooling is going up. And the savings are definitely on the freight side. And if we have good luck, because we move the supplier closer, we can put some added value into the supplier location, because making now a bigger part, maybe we reduce manufacturing cost. And insofar from a supply chain perspective, it's very important, and from an organizational perspective, that we are able to trade off, to facilitate these trade-offs of the different cost factors. And inventory, for example, not shown on the slide, is a different one, where we need to find a good balance and the sweet spot for the future. And on the last slide I'm having here, I want to show again the complete scope of a supply chain organization, and saying we need to create some transparency. I'm a little bit careful with the term visibility, transparency. For me, it's more important how to work jointly together to create these savings. I mean, supply chain, when I talk about supply chain, we have extended legs and extended arms in terms of carriers, in terms of third-party providers, fourth-party providers, which are part of the complete supply chain, which are part of the complete value chain. And the question is, if we create some transparency, how can we jointly develop some cost savings for either side of the game? And I just want to use a couple of examples. If you see on the upper side, on the left side, the order flow. We are, for example, able to provide a 6 days, in some plants, a 10 days frozen sequence pearl chain to our suppliers and also to our carriers. What are we able to do with that one? I heard in a previous discussion a lot about stability. So when we talk about stability, how can we use it? Can we jointly develop concepts, ideas, which makes our life completely easier on either side? When I talk about the material side, I mean, we have our famous pickup sheets. A lot of people like it, a lot of people don't like it. Pickup sheet process for us is not only a transport documentation, it's part of a pre-receiving process of our manufacturing operation. I have to say, it's paper intensive and thus, in terms of a little bit bureaucratic. How can we do it differently? New technology, we have in the meantime tablet computers, we have mobile phones, data transmissions. Can we develop this process further? And how do we jointly use it? I mean, we can't do it for ourselves because we can maybe provide the backbone, the infrastructure, but the usage needs to come from our third-party providers, from the carriers in the process. And last example, on the outbound network and visibility, as I said, we have a 6 days frozen sequence. We know pretty much what car is when rolling off the line. Can we use it for better managing the outbound network by already saying the truck is already waiting when the last car is coming on? A little bit provocative, yeah. Of course, it will be some time buffer in between, but in essence, we can plan for it when a car will be ready. What are the benefits we can make out of it in terms of giving you some lead time of data transparency where we can plan on? Yeah, with that one, would like to close the presentation and thank you for your attention.
Okay, Marzell, thanks very much. I think that was a great introduction to getting a sense of what sort of possibilities there are when we look at the complete supply chain and supply chain planning. We'll return to some of that in the Q&A. But first, with something of an outbound logistics perspective and how we can take a total supply chain view there, I'd like to invite Christian Fuss, Vice President, Head of Supply Chain Management for Europe at Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, my name is Christian Fuß. I'm responsible for supply chain management, for supply chain solutions, for integrated solutions, and I'm based in the office in Stockholm, which is our regional office. I would like to take you to a journey today. And this journey is about the trade-off really between cost and quality in the supply chain. And if we look at the schematic here, on the left side, you see the factory, and then we try to show the picture how a car moves through the different supply chain legs and arriving on the right side at the dealer. WWL is active in all of these legs individually, and also we are offering integrated solutions across the supply chain. So based on this experience and some of our projects with our customers, I would like to share that with you this afternoon. I would like to say that as an industry, I think we are really strong when we look at the individual leg, when we look at that optimizing the cost of purchasing each individual leg in the supply chain. But I think when it comes to the overall supply chain, I think there's still a lot of benefit that we can gain as an industry. I would like to start with going through the individual leg, showing some hidden costs, but also some direct costs that we can see impacting the supply chain and also the quality of the supply chain. And then I would like to have a wider picture looking at the total supply chain and closing off with some solutions approach that we would like to discuss then afterwards, and hope we can have a good discussion around those solutions. So when we look at the factory compound, ideally we should only accept units that are according to the factory quality standard into the supply chain. Because a lot of the time, when a unit that is not according to the standard, we spend a lot of time downwards in the supply chain and are actually then trying to fix that problem, and it costs a lot of time and a lot of effort to correct that. Also about protection. If we have the right protection, we can also avoid, maybe it costs a little bit in the initial stage at the factory, but down the line, down the supply chain, we can actually create some savings that are far greater for the total supply chain. And also what you just mentioned, the better planning on the compound can take out some of the idle time of units spending in the compound before they are picked up. So I think that's, we are here fully to support you on that. From the factory then, of course, it's important to have the different access to the transport modes. It's also about risk. What happens if a natural disaster happens? What happens if I have a strike situation somewhere? And also, what do I do with seasonal demands? That's also a big impact. We all know about these seasonal demands, but are we really planning ahead with them? Also, when we look at the loading, ideally each car that arrives in the port should be really for the immediate sailing. And we see that sometimes units arrive and then there are some storage costs in the port, which ideally can be avoided. So it's about taking costs out of the supply chain. Also, when we have a damage already at the port of load, maybe we could use the dwell time of the unit in the port to already do some repair. Because at the end of the supply chain, somebody's waiting for that unit, and why can we not use that time already in the process so we don't have to spend additional time when it arrives at the port of discharge? And also use of change of destination. What we mean with that is, we did one project with a customer where we looked at unallocated cars, so unsold cars that are moving across the supply chain. And how many of these unallocated cars are actually sold already while they are on the way to the port? And we found that around 50% of the cars were sold, so were allocated to a dealer in that process. And before they, or when they arrive in the port of load, we can still very easily change the destination to a port that is closer to the dealer, where the unit is allocated to. If we don't do that, we have to spend a lot of inland transport costs in order to position that unit at the destination. And in this case, we actually were able to show about $1 million in savings in the supply chain just on inland transport costs by having a good process around change of destination. On the ocean transport, of course, it is good to have a safe and a reliable transport with flexible sailings to keep the capital costs down, to have the units move fast through the supply chain. And when I say here allow flexibility to load on optimal vessel, what I mean is the vessels sail very frequent, but they don't have the same port rotation. So it can be the case that a vessel that departs a few days later arrives earlier at the final, at the destination. So by booking, I think often today still we book on a specific vessel. And I think if we allow for booking on the optimal vessel, then I think we can still take some costs out and gain some benefit along the supply chain. Also, we can use the vessel as a warehouse. So if we think about this as a concept, is if we would give the dealer the access to know what's coming on the vessel, he can actually start selling from the vessel. And this may actually result in a maybe lower discount that you need to give to the customer. If you can say to him, this unit is on the way, I have it in my supply chain, and therefore, if you wait a couple of days, the car is here, so you can avoid a little bit of discount that you give for that customer. Then at the destination port, of course, you need to optimize the storage. Do I use bonded storage in order to save some cost? Do I have storage in the port, or do I do it remotely? Is another choice. Also here, surveyor costs. We see that sometimes we, as the vessel, when the vessel arrives in the port, the shipping company does a survey, and then the OEM does another survey at the same point. Is there another way of handling this? You know, sometimes maybe even taking the same picture twice and processing the same picture twice. So is there something that we can avoid taking some costs out? And then, of course, also we talk about value-added processing close to the port, either on the port or off the port, in order to do some postponement. So, you know, maybe you can use some of the factory capacity in slower times, produce units that you then customize closer to the market. So a lot of postponement. As customers maybe require more customized units even further, that can be a process that can help. And finally, inland distribution. When you hand over, and sometimes we see that we want to deliver a unit to a dealer, and he says that there's insufficient space in the moment, so we should deliver it to a temporary storage. That, of course, produces additional cost, and also additional handling, potentially even additional damages. So if that could be avoided, why should that unit leave the processing center, for example, is another approach. And then for better planning, again here, for the inland distribution, we know exactly what's coming in the supply chain at the handover point. We can plan much better the handover and the full truckload building, and we could even look at multi-brand loading, if that's possible, because then you get full loads quicker. So that's another alternative that we could think of. Then at the delivery, this is more about the quality. I mean, the customers are expecting the promised date delivery. And I think that is something that we are certainly think that this is very important, and we are here to help our customers for the end customer. As well, if there is a damage at the dealer, at least we should have an efficient process to handle it, because we shouldn't delay that delivery of the unit. Somebody's waiting for that car, and then if we have a long processing time, there may be a delay impacting the capital cost. You don't get paid as quickly, and so on. So, and then also using the latest technology, I think that's another area. We have this aspect of big data, but also planning in the supply chain is another aspect. So now if we look a little bit more across the total supply chain, how we can add value. I think the end customer demand, and we heard this also in different presentations this morning, the end customer demands are changing. And I think, what does this mean for us? I think, is there now an expectation that the customer wants to have more information as the unit moves from the factory? Is it, do we need to give the customer, bind the customer into that process more? Is some of the questions we would like to ask. then visibility here, and also this was of course mentioned before. Visibility here, I mean not so much that you know where each unit is, I mean more that you plan with the unit. And for example, if a vessel arrives a day earlier, the processing center can actually reschedule the labor. If it's early enough informed, you can reschedule the labor, you can plan complete differently, avoiding costs. So it's this kind of planning that what I refer to, that can be improved and take out costs overall. Optimized inventory, what I mean is when you have full planning and control on the units, that's actually when you are able to reduce the inventory in the supply chain. And therefore, capital costs can be reduced. But also, what if you have too little inventory? I mean, what are the costs of not having enough cars in the supply chain is also cost of not selling and not being able to sell that unit is another aspect. So I think that's another area to look at. Network optimization, I mean, we are looking here at optimizing the supply chain in terms of cost, quality, environment, and time, of course, lead time. And we have a model that we use here, and we can study the whole supply chain, and we can plan scenarios for our customers where we simulate and adding a port of discharge, for example. How could that have an impact on reducing inland transport costs, for example? And there we also did a study for one customer, and we found that we could reduce the cost at 10% on the port of load to dealer supply chain by changing the network, I should say. And process improvement here, I'm talking about how we invoice, or from booking, from forecasting, how we invoice, how can we work better together and take out costs along that process. And then this is a little point. We all know about the wholesale targets that we have in the industry. And these, they can also cause some additional costs in the supply chain. I give another example where we have in a processing center, we have over the months relatively little activity. And then in the last 3-4 days, there's a huge amount of activity. And so you have very much not enough used labor during the majority of the months. But in the peak time, you may actually recruit additional temporary labor. You may have to work over the weekends in order to meet that wholesale target. And I think that these are costs. It's maybe a little bit ambitious to take out, why are we having these wholesale targets? But can we work towards minimizing the impact in the supply chain there? And finally, differentiation. Here, I mean prioritization, for example. Prioritization of sold unit, prioritization of models is one aspect here. So when a unit comes off the vessel in a discharge port, how do I make sure it's the cars that are most urgent are coming off first? Is there a process that I can steer that? And we think there is, and we are doing this for some of our customers. And also, I mean, as you buy a large luxury car and also a small, let's say, economy car, is there a different information that you expect as a customer? Is one supply chain the same? Should it be for every car the same? Or should we have some kind of segmentation in the supply chain? Is another aspect. So does one size fit all is the other question. Finally, so from a solutions perspective, and this is we look forward to discussion, I think we need to look more at the whole picture, see the whole picture. There is, of course, the tendency to look at import and export and so on. But I think if we create an overall benefit, if we look at the whole supply chain and look at how can we improve it across all the legs. Sometimes paying more in one leg may actually help you save a lot of costs in the other parts of the supply chain. This is what I mean, optimize waste, take out cost, optimize cost, take out waste. Somebody in the supply chain is paying for something. And sometimes when we hear, yes, but these costs are not for my account, I mean, somebody is paying for that. So is this also something that we can address and take those costs out as well? Constructive innovation, I think, is what I mean here is we need to foster an environment where innovation is actually promoted. Innovation is doing things better, is doing things new. And I think we need to create an environment where the companies that participate in the innovation, they have a benefit from the value add that is created through that innovation. So maybe a patent over for some time, or a contract. We heard it a little bit earlier, that we have a little bit longer contracts to make sure that you benefit from that innovation. I think that's what we mean with constructive innovation. And then closer cooperation. We heard this also this morning. I think a lot of it is said, but I think we can learn more from each other. We can involve the different parties more in solution development. I think it's about having the time, having access to each other, trust each other, and really work on solutions that are better for the whole of us. So what I would like to end then is with a statement. I look forward to this discussion. It's from Dr. Ian Robinson from BMW, and leave it like that and look forward to a good discussion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, Christian. Very comprehensive look there with some of the possibilities in efficiency and optimizing the outbound supply chain, including its many pieces that are there. We'll come back again to some of that on the Q&A. Now, perhaps looking from another side of the supply chain again is Neovia Logistics. We have Dr. Michael Kluger, Vice President of the Commercial Division.
What a pleasure to be back. Last time I spoke at this event is exactly 10 years ago. It was in Montreux, and it was in 2004. Who was there at the time? 2004? So Louis and the team must do something right when people come back, huh? Great. Great to be back. Thanks. Well, I've now made a living in logistics for almost 30 years. I've done some software development, consultancy in logistics. I've been responsible for engineering solutions design at logistics providers. I've run multi-country contract logistics divisions. I've been on the customer side. I worked for several years for a very large automotive OEM, so I was a customer for many of you. And now someone asked me to stand up and talk about adding value to the complete supply chain. So I thought, well, that's an easy one. Just, tell them you work for Neovia, formerly known as Caterpillar Logistics. Tell them a bit about what Neovia does. Industrial contract logistics, 100 sites in 26 countries, all that stuff. But then I thought maybe that's a bit of a cheap shot, and that's not what this esteemed crowd is expecting. So I'm resisting that temptation. But you still may sign up with us and add value to your supply chain. That does work. But really looking at the fine print in the program, adding value to the complete supply chain, then it talks about managing cost, maintaining best possible standards in quality and flexibility. That does not mean the same thing for everybody. We heard that already. Not every supply chain is the same. But if we look at an automotive supply chain, any automotive supply chain, I dare you to find an automotive supply chain that involves less than 4 or 5 companies that are here in the room. So this is a lot about collaborating, right? People working together. Maybe even with this esteemed and high caliber crowd in the room, we may not find the holy grail of supply chain value today, but we might get a bit closer. So I thought again about what that means. And again, this is about multiple people from different companies, different cultures, different countries, different walks of life, working together for the greater good, trying to fight the common enemy, which is waste in the supply chain, right? So maybe we need to look a bit closer into what that means. And in my view, 3 words come to mind. And I want to talk a little bit about those 3 words. The 3 words are understanding, alignment, and execution. And now everybody, standing, alignment, execution. So what does that mean, understanding? If you don't understand what the ultimate customer of your supply chain needs, then you're not doing a good job as a participant and a stakeholder in that supply chain. That's a very broad statement. We all drive cars, most of us do. And even though all the OEMs in the room make fantastic quality cars these days, sometimes things go wrong. Vehicles need to be serviced. And everybody knows that frustration and the rage that you experience when you don't get that part fast enough and you don't get your car back fast enough. And if you do not remember that rage and that frustration when you are a player in an automotive aftermarket supply chain, then you're missing the boat, because that's what you're working for, to minimize that rage and that frustration with the final client. If you are in an inbound to production supply chain, involved anywhere in the long string of the supply chain, anywhere in the first tier, second tier chain, if you have not spent some time at the assembly line, understanding the line back principle, understanding the ergonomics of the point of fit where your part is being assembled and put onto the car, if you've never done that, I don't think you can do a really good job being a part of that supply chain to production. So you have to understand what's happening at the end. Even if you are a commodity buyer in an automotive manufacturer. There was the famous anecdote where someone was supposed to buy a flywheel. And the flywheel was procured about 20 kilometers away from the assembly plant where the final vehicle was supposed to be assembled. And you're thinking, great. Well, the flywheel gets assembled to the engine, right? The engine came from the other side of the Atlantic. So that flywheel waved hello to the vehicle assembly plant in Western Europe, made its way across the Atlantic, was assembled to the engine, and then came back again. So even in a tiny little piece of supply chain contribution, you have to understand what's happening. Understanding is vitally, vitally important, and especially if you are in charge of designing, developing, creating, specifying the supply chain. That usually means you're on the customer side of the table. Then you better make sure that all the people you want to work with you in that supply chain understand what it is you're trying to do. So do spend the time, explain to all the parties that you want to collaborate with you, explain to them what you're trying to do. Make everybody understand your supply chain and the goals, the vision that you have for your supply chain. The second word, alignment. Who in this room knows the American author Bill Bryson? Anyone? Bill Bryson? Oh, a few of you. Coincidentally read his book, Short History of Nearly Everything? Anyone? Love that book. There is a chapter, and on 400 pages he explains everything that the human race has ever discovered or invented. There is one chapter there, one section on paleontology, finding dinosaur bones. And he explains how the early paleontologists, difficult word, the early paleontologists, English gentlemen, with bowler hats and, were crawling through the English hills trying to find dinosaur bones. And this was a tedious job, and they thought, well, let's make this a bit easy for us. There was a bunch of people out there who are digging through the soil all the time, the farmers. So we'll tell them, whenever they find something that looks like a bone or a bone fragment, anything that can possibly stem from a dinosaur, bring it to us and you'll get tuppence or whatever the monetary, an acceptable monetary reward was at the time. And that scheme worked fantastically. They received bathtubs of dinosaur bone fragments almost every day. It was great. They loved it. And they looked at that, they analyzed, and they could, funny enough, they could reconstruct, wonderful whole T-Rex thigh bones almost every time. What had happened? The farmers had found complete T-Rex thigh bones, and they smashed them into pieces. Because they received the same amount of money for a whole bone, for half a bone, or for a tenth of a bone, or for a small fragment of a bone. Why is this relevant in supply chain? Ladies and gentlemen, this is about target setting. Target setting and incentivizing. Most of us in daily life misunderstand that as an instrument to shove money back and forth, right? Generate incentives, bonus schemes, and so forth. Well, ladies and gentlemen, target setting is not about shoving money back and forth. It is about driving human behavior, and that's what happened with those farmers that worked for the paleontologists. And we in supply chain, every single day, every one of us, we smash T-Rex bones into 1,000 pieces every day. All too often. Why? Because targets are not aligned properly. So if you are chief supply chain officer in charge of something that remotely resembles a supply chain, you want to make sure that your head of logistics, your head of transportation, your head of warehousing, the person who supervises your external service providers, that person's management business objectives are aligned with what you as a company want to achieve. And you better make sure that the contracts you sign up for with your service providers, that those contracts contain metrics, goals, targets that are aligned with that. And you might even want to look behind the scenes of what your service providers do. How do they incentivize their people, their management, their executives? even down to their shop floor associates. Because you want those goals and targets to be aligned, because you want all these people, all these human beings that are contributors to your supply chain, you want all these people to behave in a way that supports your goals, that furthers your supply chain, that adds value to the complete supply chain. So alignment of targets on the basis of understanding where you want to go in your supply chain, I think is vitally, vitally important. The third word I mentioned was execution. Because understanding your goals and aligning your targets, it's worth exactly 0 if you don't follow through. So in daily life, in executing the function in the supply chain, metrics and KPIs are vitally important. Again, I'm stating the blatantly obvious here, the brutally obvious. You didn't need me to tell you that. But what does that really mean? How do you measure quality in the supply chain? What does that mean, flexibility in the supply? We talked about, the fine print in the program, best standards, best possible standards in quality and flexibility. Well, you need to measure what that quality is every single day, every single shift, every single hour. So everybody who plays a role, who's a key player in your supply chain, your own internal people, your partners, your service providers, everybody in the whole chain, make a test. Call them at 3:30 in the morning, which is usually when people are at their deepest in terms of sleep. Call them at 3:30 in the morning and ask them, what's the current quality? What's the current productivity? Where, and they need to be able to tell you at 3:30 in the morning. If they don't, maybe they're not on their toes when it comes to executing their function in your supply chain. And maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit because I don't want you to call me at 3:30 in the morning. Call your own people. But I think you know what I'm trying to say here. I've actually, in this century, so this is not ages ago, I've actually spoke to warehouse managers when they were asked, what's your quality in this place? The answer was, well, customer hasn't complained in a while, so it must be okay. Yeah, maybe that's not what you want, right? You want rigorous metrics. You want to be crystal clear where you are, where the gaps are towards achieving a target for this year, for this quarter, for this month. You want to be crystal clear on whether there are any trends and tendencies that you need to rectify. And if so, you want people to establish what we at Neovia we call root cause corrective action reports. So you want people to sign up and own those KPIs and own the achievement of the targets that you've set together. We take it that far, and I'll do a little insert with something we do at Neovia again. We have a program we call Sure Start. The name speaks for itself almost. It's a milestone, gateway-based program process that really governs the relationship from the first contact with a client all the way to implementing the business and running the business. According to Sure Start, anyone who signs up with us, we establish, either take over or implement, launch a warehouse for a client. We will not touch your product if we have not set up all the necessary metrics. And there is a standardized set of metrics. We measure PQVC, people, quality, velocity, and cost metrics. And before that is set up, we will not touch your products. Because we believe doing something in the supply chain, executing a function in an overall supply chain without measuring and rigorously following up is not good business. So I can just recommend, don't forget that execution part there. So, we talked about KPIs and execution. So let's take them in the reverse order. If you have established KPIs, if you establish that framework of executing a function in the supply chain, that and only that enables achieving those targets, those aligned targets that we talked about, right? And if you do achieve those aligned targets, well, that does promote, that does drive getting closer to that vision of your supply chain that was understood by everybody, the common understanding. And whenever that happens, it's a great feeling. I think that's the ultimate value that you can add to a complete supply chain. And whenever that happens, we at Neovia, we love when it happens, and we love to celebrate that together with our customer, and then set even higher targets for the next year. And we believe that understanding, alignment, and execution is really ultimately what we are duty-bound to deliver to our clients, and what I recommend to all of you to seek in your supply chains, and encourage your supply chain partners, whether they're your customers, your providers, or your peers in the industry, encourage everybody to do that. we have always found that is beneficial, and it's a lot more fun than not doing it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. That's a really great speech there, I think, on what we need to do and look at the supply chain. I did take the liberty of putting your mobile phone number down on our social stream to go live so that everyone around the world can call you tonight at 3:30. Just double check that you really mean, practice what you preach. So, and it'll be coming at different time zones.
I just swallowed that SIM card. It's gone. It's not reachable anymore.
Okay, great. Well, we've got time for some Q&A. I'm throw it direct out to the floor. Otherwise, I obviously have some questions myself. But does anybody from the audience like to start us with a question? Well, let's start then a little bit what Michael was talking about, is aligning your targets and your KPIs, and these are kind of, I don't know, these seem to me to be quite different, as Michael pointed out, to different people. And so maybe for Marzell, with your job is to sort of try to integrate somehow, some way, what's best between finance and purchasing and manufacturing and customers, even though sometimes things might end up looking really ridiculous to logistics, like a piece of an engine waving hello to a factory on its way to and from another continent. How do you balance that within the different departments? I mean, does purchasing still rule the day, or are you really, is there conflict, and how do you resolve that?
Excellent question. I mean, one thing is, as I alluded to, the issue of measuring pretty much everything you can and want to measure. But what you're hitting at, I would really use the word collaboration here. And again, the understanding, because in the end, if you are, I guess I'm afraid I'm repeating a bit what I tried to say. If you do play a role in a supply chain, either for your own company or for your customer, you better want to spend some time and bothering to understand what it is you're doing. Understand what your role in that big machinery is. You may only be a small cog, a small wheel in the whole setup, but at Neovia, there's a sentence we sometimes use. We say we like to panic early. So we like to really understand and try to dive into things and spend the energy early and up front in order to avoid surprises later. So again, understand what you're doing. You always, no matter what you do, you always have inputs from other people. They set targets, they give you jobs, they tell you what to do, and sometimes even how to do it. But from a certain level upwards, I think we're all, not only living, breathing, but thinking animals. And we should try and understand what the impact is that we have on the ultimate output. And again, no one size fits all. We will always have these anecdotes. They will always be there. The trick is to find them, identify them, and encourage people to change and get better. Sure. And want to get better. I think that's a vital prerequisite, that people want to get better.
Marzell, I mean, it seems to me at GM there's been some changes over the years, a lot more focus on total enterprise cost and things like that. It's always been said, but I have some impression that there's been something of a mindset change. I mean, is that accurate to say? Can you point to examples where those things have changed?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely accurate. We spent the last couple of years, and I mean, we're about 10 years on this journey, but we got some momentum in the last year about really this total enterprise cost and the right mindset. If you looked in the organization, and I just want to pick up your comment about understanding, I mean, you need to understand what are the targets of the other party. I mean, a buyer and maybe the product engineer together with the buyer, they have a target of lowest material cost. And maybe it's even anchored into the organization in terms of an allowable cost target, what you could have for a certain part. And they make the decision if they don't understand on the other side that the physical location of sourcing a supplier is driving some value stream cost into the organization. And as I said, we spent quite intensive effort together with our partners in purchasing and engineering and manufacturing engineering to look into the complete value chain, to understand the value chain, the implications of certain requirements, and have also agreed on a kind of procedure how we deal with it. I mean, means everybody has to put the facts, the numbers on the table, and then we do what we call a total enterprise cost calculation. It goes a little bit beyond total landed cost. For simpler commodities, we do total landed cost. But we are very rigid in this process. I mean, we have implemented a kind of sign-off sheet means during the sourcing table, when we say the business gets awarded, there needs to be signatures under the recommendation from all involved parties. If the signature is not given, we have a governance structure where we can appropriately escalate to a higher level in the organization to make then a mutual decision. But as I said, I mean, it drives understanding and mindset in the organization.
Thank you. Christian, from your perspective, do you feel this is being done enough on the outbound side? I mean, there's a lot, for obvious reasons, we've focused, Marzell is focusing a lot on manufacturing, I think, but I mean, do you see this replicated for outbound? Is that enough of a constraint in planning production, for example, or really taking that view?
Yeah, I think on the outbound side, there is a lot of more openness, I think, to look at things and to also evaluate different concepts and look at alternative network setup. I think some of the challenges that we see is maybe it's a little bit also about access to people. Allowing time to do these projects is also sometimes a little bit a challenge for us. But I think there is an awareness, an increase, and of course we are trying with these, with my presentation today, also raise this awareness that I think there are some areas where we can look at in the outbound supply chain and optimize even further than beyond today. So I think there is something, but I think it could be even stronger. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience there? You all might think that because you don't ask a question, you're going to go to the gala dinner sooner or something, but you see, that's where you're wrong, because I'm actually in control of this. So. A question, I guess, for the whole panel. Maybe one of the logistics providers can start with it, though. Louis and I were talking about this earlier. So, you know, it's one thing to talk about planning the whole supply chain from the car maker's perspective, but then it gets tendered or RFQ'd in pieces, typically. So from a logistics provider or even from a purchasing standpoint, I mean, how is that segmentation, or let's say commoditization of the supply chain, does that hurt the total supply chain view in your opinion?
Yeah, I can start. I think yes. I think in the overall picture, it is of course important to look at the individual cost into each leg. But I think and so I understand that approach. But I think we are losing some of the value that we could create if we would look much further beyond the supply chain. So I think there could be more done in less individual. You know, I mean, you need to be aware that you have a competitive offer, but I think you need to also be a little bit aware and look beyond that individual RFQ.
I would differentiate. You used two words. You used segmentation, I think, and you used commoditization. I would differentiate. Segmentation is probably a good thing, because a lot of our service providers try to tell the world, you know, we're full supply chain overall, you know, end to end and so forth. While in some cases there is some truth to it, really in most cases every one of us has their strengths and their weaknesses. So if I'm the customer, I do want to get the best player in place for every segment of my supply chain. So we very, very rarely see RFQs or situations where one service provider truly does the end-to-end for a customer. And maybe that's not really necessary. It's something we can all aspire to, but really segmentation in terms of getting the best possible party to operate each and every part of your supply chain, I think that's a good thing. Commoditization, different story, I guess, because there are some services in the supply chain that probably truly are commodities that you can grasp with a simple, you know, Excel table and some numbers and be done with it. But there are some other parts, and well, we provide industrial contract logistics, you know, and the RFQs in that arena, they usually have all kinds of words about you, the service provider, have to do, you know, Kaizen here, continuous improvement there, and all kinds of the good stuff, really good stuff. And then we're supposed to put our offer into a pricing sheet Excel table where you just don't see how you can put all those things that the customer is asking for, that you want to give them, how can you put that into that Excel sheet? And that's sometimes where we struggle a bit, and it's sometimes where maybe the communication between whoever asks for a service and whoever tries to offer that service, maybe that communication sometimes is a bit hindered and pressed through a bottleneck of those Excel sheets and pricing templates and commoditization in the procurement department. Luckily, there are still a lot of people out there who really dive deep, as a customer, dive deep into the offers that they get from service provider, really understand what's behind that, and that's a good thing. That usually gives them better value at the end. So segment, yes. Commoditize, be careful.
Yeah, thanks for that. Do you want add anything, Marzell?
I think it has already been said. I mean, there is no one service provider who could provide the complete, even if you would say, even on the outbound side, would not be able to have the complete outbound situation. And then you see some physical limitations. I mean, there are some capacity constraints that some lane cannot be fulfilled with one service provider. You have multiple on. Then we talk about different scope of the service providers, ships, rail, trucks, warehousing, whatever. And in essence, I mean, it drives the fragmentation into the complete network. On the other side, somebody needs to have the complete overview about the value chain. Otherwise, we are losing somewhat control. And this is, in my view, what's called network planning. There is one party who's doing the network planning and should do it from the grand scheme that everything fits together and that the interfaces between the different business partners are aligned and are working seamless.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a question in the front, second row. Coming behind you there.
Hello, very interesting, Frank Ritz, Opel Logistics. Very interesting view on commoditization and OEMs and Tier 1 and Tier 2 searching for perhaps the best solution. But there are some dangers out there in addition to the websites where you have a couple of paragraphs to respond, as Michael was saying. We bid for some shipping movements a year ago. And we weren't briefed fully when we started. And let's say there were 100 shipping lanes. We didn't bid for everyone. We only bid where we thought we had a very competitive offer. And we ended up not getting anything because we were told that they basically wanted to hand these lanes over in blocks. So if you were the world's worst, on one lane, they still wanted you to bid. So they weren't actually buying the absolute best. They were buying a level of convenience or management. Obviously, next time, we will take that on board. Any comments?
Well, what can we say? We did speak about joint understanding, right? Understanding what the other person wants. In that case, obviously, that understanding has not been created. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, interesting example there. I think we had another hand up, unless right in the front here.
Hello, my name is Elif Kush from Fiat Turkey. I want to ask something. We mostly focus on cost optimization because, we are the cost drivers as supply chain. But we talked about value. What can be the value added by supply chain that I mean the people interact with cars or vehicles as passenger, as driver, that the customer feels or perceives as value and he will be willing to pay for it. What can be that value of supply chain, especially to Michael Kluger? Thank you.
Okay. I thought that was a question for the OEM, and please do chime in there.
I will also, but maybe you
Certainly,
should answer first.
Probably in supply chain, we are closer to the ultimate customer on the aftermarket side, because obviously in an inbound to production supply chain, yeah, we do fulfill customer requirements in terms of variations and specific vehicle specifications, all that, and we kind of enable that. But we're really closest when it comes to the aftermarket supply chain. And some years ago, I did some business in the tire industry, for example. For the tire industry, the vital service parameter is cutoff times. So, because every one of us, when we want new tires, is usually when the season changes, and you don't plan that. You make it dependent on weather. So all of a sudden, somewhere in late fall or early winter, the weather turns bad and really cold, and you go, oh my goodness, I need winter tires. So next time you have some time, which tends to be either Friday evening or Saturday morning, you go to the dealer and say, I want these tires. And you want them now. So if you are Bridgestone or Goodyear or Michelin or whoever, if you want to have a significant market share, you need to be able to fulfill that very consumer need, because that's not the need of the dealer, that's not the deal of not a need of the car manufacturer, that's the need of you, and me. That's what we expect. And what's behind that? Well, that's supply chain, that's logistics. That's about how do you deploy your inventory. Depending on the season and the weather forecast, you place your products, close to the client. We just some weeks ago saw in the press that Amazon is now implementing previous day delivery. So based on their algorithms and their predictions, they think, well, probably statistically, there will be a peak in sales of such and such SKU in that region next week. So I better take a chunk of those products and already move them closer to that region. I don't have a single customer order yet, but I already placed inventory in the region, so as to enable faster customer delivery. And I think those kinds of things, especially in aftermarket, is where we in logistics still can find some new tricks. I think there's yet a lot of things to come when it comes to smarter algorithms, in planning better, in anticipating better, in understanding better the customer needs, and profiling what that is, and making actual supply chain decisions from that. Not just guessing and waiting, but truly taking decisions and move parts, move components, move product in order to get closer to the client's needs ultimately. I'm not sure whether that answers the question, but
From my side, I mean, when we talk client now, then I'm looking at the end customer. So the customer really that orders that unit. And I think there it starts already that you get a quite detailed delivery date, when to expect that unit to be delivered to you. And then, of course, also to meet that delivery date. That's a value that you can bring through the supply chain to the customer. I think it's also a lot about information. I mean, when we order, for example, when we order a book online, there is a lot of information we get as a consumer from the picking from the warehouse until it arrives at your home. Is that something that we can adapt and do the end customers expect that kind of information from the supply chain providers or from where the company they order their car? Then I think even along that supply chain, maybe we can educate the customer what happens with that car. You could have for maybe a luxury limousine, maybe you want to show a picture how that car moves along the supply chain. I mean, this is just an idea of the spot here. But and then also I think it's about updating the customer as it gets closer to the delivery date that you plan with that customer. Maybe he plans to go on holiday, or he would like to have a follow-up on his lease car and return the lease car. So I think that kind of planning, that is really important, and that adds a lot of value, I think, in the supply chain.
It's the same question that we are asking ourselves about, would it be of value if we would, like one of these parcel services, that we provide our customers a visibility where his vehicle order standing for. It's standing, let's say it's at the dealer entry, now it's in the order fulfillment department, and the car has been physically built in body shop, paint, whatever, and then it's on the transportation lane. The question is, does it provide some real benefit, value add for the customer? And could elaborate on that one a little bit. How to explain a customer that a car is just 4 weeks about waiting to get being built? I would say this is about common practice if I know the knowledge from our other OEMs we have around. About 4 weeks until frozen period, where really until the car gets built. We'll have a customer understanding that a car is on average between 5 to 12 days on its way from a plant until it reaches a dealer. If he comes from an Amazon mindset, 24-hour overnight delivery. Okay, this is a visible value add. We can discuss about it if it's required and if it's really cost efficiently. On the other side, the value add, I would like to use an example. How many of you have been asked by friends if you are on a party and saying, and what are you doing for a living? And you respond, I'm working in supply chain. And you just earn some puzzled looks and saying, what? A lot of people just don't understand supply chain, and for them it's not visible. Our value is that everything fits together, and in essence, what's coming, short lead time, to reduce the transportation time from 12 days to 10 days is a value for the customer if he gets a car earlier, and he gets it reliably earlier. If we tell him he gets a car in 4 weeks, he probably is happy if he gets it in 4 weeks. He's even happier if he knows he gets it in 4 weeks. Instead, we promise him he gets it in 2 weeks, but we deliver in 3. And I think we have to understand a lot of our service is below the radar screen of a customer. Means we still have to do a lot of that for our brands, for our customers, that they get what we as an organization promise to them. And secondly, we have to do it cost efficiently.
Thank you very much. There's been a couple of mentions of Amazon and retailing kind of side. Just a reminder that tomorrow morning we have a session which is actually looking specifically at some non-automotive companies and their logistic processes, including Starbucks and some others. So it might be interesting to come. It sounds like pretty soon Amazon's going to be delivering to you before you've even ordered something. So, you know, I'm not sure if we're really still ahead of the game in automotive. I think we might have time for one more question if there is one before we go to the live voting. Okay, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I think we still could talk about, from implant logistics to you know, a host of other things, but I think, you know, we've covered some good ground here, and I want to thank the panel for their presentations and the questions. So stay with us now, because we're going to move on to the live voting segment here. So first of all, for those of you who haven't seen this or haven't yet logged on, this is how you log on using a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop. You go to our event website and you go to live, or in fact, there's the shortened URL there. You have your delegate number that's on your badge. So if anybody who hasn't logged in and wants to participate in this, they can do so. For our live audience around the world, just a note, there's a slight delay between what I'm saying now and what you're hearing for obvious streaming buffer reasons. So if you want to participate in the live voting, look at if you scroll down on your page, you'll see the questions and the poll results. Look at those, because that's where the questions are going to come, and you can vote on those, and you'll be able to see the live results. If you just look at me, you'll get it 30 seconds after. So that's just, again, for our people who are watching around the world at home or in their offices. So the way this will work, you'll see there's poll questions on your screens, which will come up shortly with a question. We'll give you 10 seconds or so to choose an answer, and then we'll generate a result. Okay, so hopefully you're all logged in now, because we've got the first the first question there, and it's ready for voting. And that question is, what will be the biggest issue for European automotive logistics over the next 1 to 5 years? Do you think it will be climate change, including green regulations and legislation? Will it be changes in mobility patterns? That could be, for example, the growth of car sharing or shifts in driving habits and behaviors? Is it rising costs, be that fuel or commodities or whatever it might be? Will it be sourcing production market shifts, so whether that's factories opening or closing someplace, production shifting, localization, etc.? Will it be infrastructure deficits, so lack of links on rail and road congestion, or issues in ports, or what it might be? Or will it be political instability? Pretty appropriate given some of the things that are happening right on Europe's, or in Europe really, but in Ukraine or in Turkey at the moment. So if you want to choose your answer, we've got 10 seconds or so to do that. And the result is, by quite some ways, we've got 42% saying sourcing, production, and market shifts. So by a factor of almost double, you think that the changes in Europe, perhaps that's no surprise, given that we know there's factories closing this year, and there will be a few more. But likewise, as we heard this morning, there's also quite a few new models that are being localized in Europe. So The whole shift of the landscape, in a way, is going to be our biggest challenge. Okay, next question. What will make the biggest difference to improving logistics? Will it be investing in assets or in equipment? Would it be better or more IT systems and software? Would it be production and sourcing localization in the supply chain? Would it be better training, skills, education, so effectively the people, the management and talent and labor talent in the supply chain? Is it going to be regulation, legislation that improves or affects, that improves logistics? Or indeed, will it be better business or supplier relations? So perhaps more collaboration between OEMs, between LSPs. So if you're using a smartphone, by the way, you can scroll down and you'll see the results when they're ready. Please vote. Interesting. By 34%, say it's going to be better IT systems and software. It's good news for a few providers in this room. Perhaps it's no surprise given that we've had quite a focus on systems today across quite a few of our sessions. But pretty close, or at least even behind it, is people-related things. So whether it's skills and training or better supplier relations, those things together actually factor in more than anything else. So some interesting results. We'll move on to the next question. Okay, this is perhaps coming off of the back of Amazon delivering before you've even ordered something. Is automotive a leading industry in logistics and supply chain? Do you think yes, and in fact the current methods and systems remain leading edge? Is it yes, but actually more for the historic processes, whether it's just in time, just in sequence, cross-docking, etc.? No. It's not leading edge, but it's starting to improve, starting to innovate? Or is it just plain no, it's behind the times and no signs of life so far? And the results are... So, more than half of you think it is still quite in the head, but it's not actually for what's being new or introduced today. It's more for the historic processes. So that's, half empty, half full one there. Still ahead, but we may not be forever the way some of the changes that are happening in the industry. So come tomorrow morning, please, and hear how you might become more leading edge. Next question. So where should the most focus be for improvement of automotive logistics? Should it be what we were effectively talking about just in this session, taking a total supply chain approach? Or is it indeed back to basics? Better transport, warehousing, logistics, better operations? Is it IT systems and software, as we heard earlier? Is it better business or supplier relations? Or is it just plain reducing costs? Maybe you're all just sucking up to the panel, but 54% say take a total supply chain approach. So again, I guess that would be integrating everything else. So that's kind of in some ways the all of the above, but in fact, I think that shows, again, quite by some ways. Okay, this an appropriate question given the presentation this morning from Volkswagen, which focused quite a bit on green logistics and reducing emissions. For your company, regardless of whether you're an OEM, tier supplier, logistics provider, would you say how much of a priority is green logistics or climate change in your operations and your decision making? Is it a major priority? Is it important, but not in today's economy? So you know it's important, but you're not effectively doing it yet. You're doing it, but only for win-wins, so where it reduces your cost. Is it only to meet regulatory demands? We know that Sika, for example, control zone is going to reduce sulfur down to 0.1 in most of Northern Europe, so we know we got to do that. Is that the only green real initiatives that you have? Or is it not really a priority at all right now? Let's see who's honest. So, only for win-wins and where you're reducing cost. So, I mean, some people would say that in almost all cases, green logistics should reduce costs, but I think we know from some of the investments that that requires and some of the real changes that that's probably not always the case. So, perhaps it's no surprise in some ways that mostly we're doing this to reduce cost. 25% of you do say that it's a major priority. And luckily, only 12% between the two are just doing it to meet regulatory demands or in fact don't care about it at all right now. So actually some pretty positive results there, I'd say. I have to apologize in advance for this question that it's me delivering it because this is sort of like watching Monty Python in an American accent. It really should be Louis. Oh no, that's the next question, sorry. This one is perfectly appropriate for me to you'll see what I mean. You'll see what I mean soon. Where do you expect to invest the most in the next 1 to 5 years? You've quite a list of options here. Are you going to invest most in Western Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe, in Russia and Central Asia, in North Africa and the Middle East, in Asia, in North America, in South America, or in Africa? Say Southern Africa. So that's interesting. I mean, in the European conference, that almost 40% of you actually are still going to invest the most in Asia over the next 1 to 5 years. But perhaps reflecting a little bit of what we heard this morning about some of the positive and the growth that are coming. Western Europe at 24%, so a quarter of you is actually the next biggest location. I mean, it's no surprise, it's also where we are in some ways, but perhaps that's reflecting some of the growth and some of the slightly improving picture that it looks like we're going to see. Interesting that Central and Eastern Europe is at the bottom, below even Africa. I have to say that one surprises me. So Asia, top of the list. Now you see what I mean. Monty Python in an American accent here. Who's going to win the FIFA World Cup this summer in Brazil? Is it England? Is it Spain? Is it Brazil? Is it Argentina? Is it England? Or is it some other country? We left off the ones that will obviously not be winning it. That's a good jibe right back at him, I think. So put your bet spreads down. All right, fantastic. That's the last question. I really thank everyone for participating in that. I think it's a really good way to get a feel for what's kind of happening in the sector. So we really look forward to seeing you now at the gala dinner. We're going to have coaches leaving pretty much right now. So we'll see you at the gala dinner or tomorrow morning back here. Thanks again.